Welcome to the book of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel is a book that contains the accounts of David's life as king of Israel, as one of the greatest of Israel's kings. It contains stories of success and of failure, of character and of disappointment. It contains stories of victims who are silenced and voiceless, but of the God who sees and the God who knows, and the God who does justice and the God who shows mercy. We see all that working out in the pages of this book. The book begins with David being told of the death of Saul and Jonathan, of David lamenting Saul and Jonathan's death. Then of rebellion against David's rule by Abner, the commander of Saul's army. He takes Saul's surviving son, Ishbosheth, and makes him king over the northern tribes of Israel. David's left with Judah in the south, and there's war. After a period of time, David and his army win. And the battle concludes, and David unifies the kingdom. And then in the next bit, David takes Jerusalem to be his capital city. He conquers that from the Canaanites, and he brings God's ark, the symbol of God's presence, into the capital. He wants to build a house for God. He's succeeded in unifying Israel. He's even beaten the Philistines, the old enemies of Israel, and now he wants to have a house for the ark in his capital city. And God says, no, you're not the one who's going to build me a house. I'm going to build you a house. I'm going to build you a lasting dynasty. A dynasty that will last forever. I'm not going to take away the kingdom from you like I took it from Saul. It's yours for good. When your sons sin, I will punish them. But your line, your kingdom will never die. And if you look on in the history of Israel, you see David's sons do indeed go wrong, and they are indeed punished. Each of David's line, including David, sins and is punished for that sin. And ultimately that ends in exile in Babylon. But that's not the end, because the hope of a king in David's line carries on in the prophets, and in the pages of the New Testament we see Jesus, the son of David, coming and living out life with us, bringing about God's kingdom and God's rule on this earth. That's the hope that David points us to, and it's the hope we need because we see in the rest of 2 Samuel that David messes up. You know the story probably of David and Bathsheba. David sees Bathsheba's beauty, he takes her, they have a child. David gets her husband killed, and it all looks like he's managed to hush it all up, but God has seen it. God knows. And God sends the prophet to confront David. David admits his sin. He admits that he's sinned and he's forgiven. But the consequences of that sin ravage David's life and David's family. And you can read that in 13 to 19. There's rape, there's murder, there's violence, there's bloodshed in David's family because of what David has done. He is guilty. But the hope that is held out there is that David is restored to his kingdom. David seeks God's mercy, and David receives God's mercy. And so the book of 2 Samuel then rounds off with a section that has a couple of stories of sin and atoning for sin. And however strange those episodes are in chapters 21 and 24, they contain wonderful truths that God will make a way for sin to be dealt with, for sin to be forgiven. Then there are stories of David's mighty men and his army, reminding us of David's conquests and his kingdom. And finally, the words of David himself, his praises to God, and his reflections on his reign and how important it is that God is there at the centre. So, get on with reading 2 Samuel, dig into it, read about their characters, their actions, their deeds, their words, see what it says, see the messy complexity of the book, and see the big picture of God's plan of salvation at work. See God's love for justice, and his delight in showing mercy to those who repent. And be encouraged that God's plans do not fail, and that even if your life feels at the moment a bit of a broken mess, as David's did at times, God can still take those broken pieces and weave them into his plans and purposes. That is the encouragement of this book of 2 Samuel, and that's why you should get on and read it now.